What's up, everybody, and welcome back into the Play the Fight Song College Football Show. Another action-packed preview episode tonight as we are covering the 16-team SEC. We are going to take you through team-by-team previews, a player to watch, hot takes, cold takes, and the conference championship prediction. Got a lot to cover. It's a very important conference, and I've heard it just means more. JP, how are we doing tonight? We ready to talk SEC football?
Pumped to talk about it. I like the teams I got a chance to preview here. I will say that for a future prediction part of this episode, I was struggling to find a team that fit the mold. I'm not sure if you guys were too, but pumped to get into it and just hear what everybody else thinks about certain teams, because I think we need a little more outside perspective rather than just my mind looking at these same 16 teams every year.
Jake, Texas, Oklahoma, leave the Big 12 where your team is from, join the SEC. How you feeling tonight? You ready to talk about your former foes?
Yeah, I got no hatred from my side. I'm ready to talk about it. I'm really interested. I'm more so just interested to watch these teams play. These previews have been a lot of fun, but I don't know about you guys. When this comes out, no, it'll be July 31st, won't it? It won't be August yet, will it?
No, it will be
yes,
July
it will.
31st.
Podcast form will be August.
Podcast form. Okay.
Correct.
So we're getting there, man. We're finally
jumping into the future.
We are in the same month that football will be played. This has been a lot of fun, but I'm sure all four of us can agree we're ready to get to the games.
Yeah, kind of those last few weeks, you start getting itchy. Football's close. Reese is back in the Midwest. Reese, you ready to talk SEC football?
Yeah, well, let's get after it. I think this is the more interesting conference. I think I have a hot take for it. I'll save it for later, but it's kind of the same idea as last year. I'm not sure what you really think of these top teams, but it's also interesting when the greatest coach of all time is leaving this conference now. So who's going to step up, be the perennial powerhouse for this conference now? So it's because it's wide open for somebody.
Definitely makes a headline. Let's get into it and let's do everything. But before we do that, stop, like this video. This is obviously not a live show as we normally do. It's a recorded video. It's a very busy week as young Parksy's getting hitched. So
somebody's got a big day coming up.
Soon-to-be wife. Yes.
The boys will be back together. We failed to mention that.
Yes, for the first time in a long time, I believe, almost over a year, probably. But that is this news this weekend. But as far as partners go, we have the same partner, No Rivals. So you got to shop No Rivals, the premium hat brand with unique designs. They're coming out with new stuff every day. Iowa and Michigan State are on the way. You're the first to hear about it. So be ready for those mid-August. But Georgia's out there. There are several teams in this conference that are on No Rivals right now, and you can get free shipping on any hat you purchase with code PTFS. So do so today. All right, let's get into it and let's do it. Let's lead it off with team-by-team previews. Jake will always lead us off, and he's going to start with the Missouri Tigers. One of the best wide receivers in college football returns for the Tigers this year. Jake, tell us about this team.
Yeah, we might as well start there, right? Luther Burden, a guy from Missouri who might be considered the best player in all of college football. Some fans may argue that, and some players in this conference may argue that, but it's going to be left for debate. I think this guy's super talented, and he's going to be highlighting a lot of good receivers in college football, and he's going to be highlighting this Missouri team who in a 12-team playoff format now might be considered a playoff team. So let's break down the rest of the team. Who's, I guess, Burden's Batman and Robin. You look at Theo East Jr., you look at Mookie Cooper. These are 2 and 3 options that are really good, could possibly be a number one receiver option on any other school, but really good pair of receivers. Brady Cook is the guy who's going to be getting them the ball once again. He secures himself last year after, I think, not only the national narrative but really the Missouri fan base was uncertain if Brady Cook was going to be the guy going into 2023. He leaves no doubts last year. He plays really well. It's just a matter of, can he stay healthy in 2024? If not, an underrated pickup in the portal, I think. They go and get Drew Pine, the former Arizona State and Notre Dame quarterback. You hope you really don't have to go to him, but I think he's a good enough guy. He can step in maybe in a third quarter situation or maybe a one-game instance type of thing, because we're going to get to their schedule later. It's manageable. Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel, a Georgia State transfer and an App State transfer, highlight this running back room, who are going to be the guys to replace Cody Schrader. Cody Schrader comes on the scene from Division II Truman State last year. Is one of the best underdog stories we've kind of seen in some time. And he was a top 3 running back in college football last year. I don't think there's no debate, But I'm really high on these two transfers coming in. I think they're going to replace the production just well. Speaking of transfers, let's go to the offensive line. Caden Green, the offensive tackle from Oklahoma, was one of the best pickups that I think you could get out of the portal on the offensive line. He started as a freshman at Oklahoma. You're shoring up that offensive line now. I think that was the last piece that you need to secure if you're Eli Drinkwitz to really put this offense on the map as a top 10 offense in college football this year. Now let's go to the other side, the defense. The defense was really good last year, late in the year, but Blake Baker heads to LSU, the defensive coordinator. So you lose 5 guys to the NFL draft. A lot of questions surround this defense, but I said, once again, the schedule is manageable. So maybe we can give this team some slack, give them a few games to really gel or mesh together. Let's start with the defensive line. Johnny Walker Jr. is a guy at defensive end who I expect to have a big year if Missouri wants to take that next step as a national playoff contender. Williams Nwaneri, guy comes in as a 5-star freshman for Missouri at defensive end. Expect him to play right away. I don't think he'll be starting, but this is a guy they're going to rely on to play meaningful snaps. So in 2 or 3 years, maybe this is a first-team All-SEC type of defensive end. Zion Young from Michigan State, Chris McClellan from Florida. These are 2 guys at defensive tackle who they bring in the portal again. They need these 2 to really work out to shore up the depth of the defensive line. The secondary has a lot of inexperience. I have a lot of question marks on it. Again, I think that the schedule helps them out in as far as their continuity and meshing things together, but they're going to need Zion Young and Chris McClellan to really figure it out if this defense wants to be good enough to compete in a playoff spot if you are that 10 seed. We can break down their schedule a little bit. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, all at home. Those are your first 4 games. That's pretty
right?
Doable.
Right? Like, I think you can try some things and you can find out who you really need on your starting lineup when you head to College Station in week 5. So we'll wait and see there, but I think the schedule is light enough. And this is a team that I expect to probably go 10-2. I think the over-under is set at 9.5 right now.
Yeah, 10-2 sounds like a good spot in my mind too. JP, where did you have the Tigers this year in your mind?
I'm right around that number. I think 10-2 gets you into a playoff. 11-1 obviously does, in that being the SEC, right? With a schedule like that, I think 10-2 might still get some head shakes depending on what happens around the country, but I think as a team that legitimately could do it, whether the schedule is super tough or not. I just think they're on a good 2-year run right here, and it should continue. Reese, your thoughts on Missouri?
I think losing your defensive coordinator, I think, is going to be a lot more challenging than I think they're maybe giving credit for, especially when they had as much success as they had last year. You lose 5 guys to the draft. Those are 5 NFL caliber guys that made your team good. Like, it's hard to replace that many guys in a given year. And also, I mean, it's kind of random too, but you lose your leg of a kicker in Harrison Mervis, who literally won you a game on a 61-yarder last year too. So I don't envision them going that far back this year, but 10-2 is doable. I think they'll still be competitive this year as long as they can stay healthy.
I think it's a little bit of an underrated home atmosphere too. I think when that place gets rocking, I remember back in the old Big 12 days, it was a tough place to play, man. So hopefully they have a good year and we get to see them on TV in some tough atmospheres. Go ahead, Jake.
I was just saying Missouri has an underrated fan base. I'll give credit where it's due.
Yeah, they're pretty strong.
They belong as a crazy SEC fan base. I would say they've earned their stripes.
Can't disagree there, but all right. That is the Missouri Tigers. We're moving down the line. We are going to go to one of the fan favorites out there, one of the best fan bases in college football, and that is the Tennessee Volunteers. JP's taking us through the Vols. JP, take us away.
Looking at Tennessee here in 2024, I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of excitement around this program on Rocky Top right now, and rightfully so in some spots. I think Heupel's done a great job kind of revitalizing this team and giving it a real identity. I think the underrated side of it is how much better the defense has gotten over the last couple of years, but I think we'll just start at the top here with Nico Imaliava. He is a guy who legitimately could change a program and change the direction of a program, and I think you see that in how hyped people are to watch this team play on Saturdays here. He gets his chance to take the reins, and I think it's going to be there's going to be some rough spots. It's just a freshman or a sophomore quarterback playing in the SEC. Don't act like this guy's going to show up and just be a world beater from day one with limited mistakes. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I think he'll be a step up from Joe Milton. And in a couple of years, he could be better than a Hendon Hooker. That's just kind of where I'm at on him. The running back room to kind of support him is going to need Dylan Sampson to step up a little bit. I think it's an offense with weapons, but it's not offensive firepower with elite weapons, right? Like if you look back a couple years ago and what they've had over the years at receiver and running back, well, the running back tandem a season ago, the receiver tandem a couple years ago, this is not that skill position group. This is a group that's still talented, but it's not going to blow you away with the names and the talent. Brew McCoy, Squirrel White are both going to return. They also bring in Chris Brazo from Tulane. I think it's a really good three-headed monster receiver. Again, I think Brazel, if anybody, is going to be the one that steps up and really lights the world on fire at receiver. I think Brew McCoy's a solid option. Squirrel White is definitely a better slot option than a lot of teams have across the country. But again, we need to just see somebody step up for this offense and really make Nico's life a little bit easier here in 2024. Look at the O-line room, and they're really confident. I think they really like what they've seen there. Multiple returning starters, and they all seen action. Like this isn't just guys that have seen just starters. It's guys that have seen action in relief as well. So they're not getting thrown into the fire. And any way you can work to make that easier on a new quarterback is great. This is a team that was more run-based in 23, and they were very good at it. I expect them to get a little more balanced this year, maybe get the quarterback run a little bit more. I do think that if you look at where everything was last year with Milton, I think Nico gives you a better speed option and gets you out on the corners a little bit more and working the edges of defense. So I'm excited to watch this team in 2024 on the offensive side of the ball, but don't act like it's going to be insane. On the defensive side, this is definitely something that's gotten better as time's gone on with Heupel there. And I think that has a lot to do with the recruiting and the staff that he's brought out around him, right? James Pierce is one of the best defensive players in the SEC in the country. He's one of the better pass rushers in the country for sure. Amari Thomas and others return. I think that'll be a really good unit for them on the defensive line. Got to reset the linebacking room, bring in 3 new guys that are all unproven, but you need guys to step up in the SEC at that position. It's guys that really lead the defense, and I think they're looking for a couple that could really help them out here. Questions at DB. They lost 7 total to the portal, whether that was the NFL or the portal. It's a reset, and it's got to get guys that can work out here, because if you're going to get in slug matches with everybody with a young quarterback, I'm a little worried about that going down the line. You might win a couple, but if you got to score 35, 40 every night, it's going to be really tough on you. Jermon McCoy came in from Oregon State to help that up, and Jacoby Thomas from Middle Tennessee. Those are the 2 guys that I think they really are going to lean on off the portal gets to make that a better secondary. But again, I'm just not there with the talent level there yet. I think they're in a kind of a gap year. If you can get to 25 healthy and really feel good about what your roster is for the most part, this team's going to be a national title contender in 25. Just one guy I think you really should know is Peyton Lewis. He's a redshirt or a freshman, true freshman. Running back. I think he's going to be a great guy to work at the running back room. And, looking at the schedule, I'm kind of going through here, wins 50-50 shot or losses. With a win total at 8.5, man, I'm right at that number. I think I'm right at 8. I think you have legit, a look at possibly 2 losses right up to that Oklahoma game in September. Like NC State and Oklahoma in September aren't easy games to win. If you really do think about Tennessee in 2024, you're going to know pretty early on where this team sits. So excited to watch Rocky Top in 24, but there's a lot of toss-up games that maybe could go their way and make it a better year, or maybe that don't go their way and make it a little bit tougher of a year, because I don't see you beating Alabama or Georgia this year. Alabama is going to be a really close game. I just think there's too many talent gaps to get a team like Georgia here.
When I look at Tennessee, I kind of compare the 2 quarterbacks from the recent past to Nico this year, and I kind of see more of a Hendon Hooker style play from him. And I think everybody can agree than I would Joe Milton, and it's just chucking the ball 100 yards downfield with the powerful arm. So that's beneficial for Tennessee fans, because they were a little bit more consistent and relevant under Hendon Hooker, and that looks like where they're leaded, at least in my mind. Jake, where do you have the Vols?
Yeah, I think if they want to replicate the 2022 season, you're going to need more from Squirrel White and Brew McCoy than you got out of Tillman and Hyatt a couple of years ago. Those 2 guys were even around last year, and they just disappointed with bad injury luck, and also just production wise, they weren't there. Maybe Chris Brazel, the transfer from Tulane, shores up some of that production and helps those 2 out. But if they really want to do what they could 2 years ago, it starts with, I think, the receivers. And I think the talent is there. We're just going to have to wait and see if they can stay healthy.
Reese, your thoughts on the Vols?
Don't bet against them when they wear their Halloween uniform, and don't bet against them when they play Kentucky.
Yeah, those
What
are
I
two
got.
very good points. 2 years
So
ago,
Save
I
bet
believe
yourself
against
those
money,
were
them.
win yourself some money.
the 22 season. I believe those were comboed. It was the Halloween blackout,
Yeah.
and they played Kentucky,
Like
and it was
30,
just an
43, they
absolute
demolished them.
nightmare. I'm actually going to bring
But
that game up later, talking about Kentucky. But
but
go
you
ahead.
bet against them when they play Florida? Maybe.
What I bet. So what I bet
You
on
you
Florida.
said don't bet against them when they play Kentucky, and I said bet against them when they play Florida.
Yeah,
So take Florida.
fair enough. I mean, that's a
That's the third thing.
fair
I don't
point.
know.
I would add up. But all right, there is the Vols in 2024. Let's move down the line. We are going back to Reese. Hopefully the Wi-Fi hangs on. But Reese, talk to us about the Auburn Tigers, a team that is well followed, another one of those gigantic fan bases. Tell us about this team this year.
Yeah, Hugh Freeze entering his second year. They went 6-7 last year. They dropped their final 3 games of the year in the Sun or in New Mexico State at home. Then you lose to Bama on the Mill Roll Miracle, and then you lose to Maryland in the bowl game. But if you can follow me here and do the math, that means this team was 6-4. And in those 4 losses, they also had losses to Georgia and also to Ole Miss by only 1 score. And I assume if you're an Auburn fan, if you hear that, you would think your head coach is taking your team in the right direction. That New Mexico State game, yeah, that kind of sticks with you more. But I think that Auburn or that Ole Miss and Georgia loss, I think should mean a little more to you guys. And then when you look at this offense, they're still not sure who their quarterback's going to be right now. They're between Peyton Thorne and Robbie Ashford as their top 2 guys. They made a decision to not spend a lot of money on the portal this year. I think it's just because they're kind of looking for a gap here. I think with the schedules can be a little tougher. But as long as you can get a serviceable quarterback who's just not going to have the turnover issues like Thorne had last year, this could be the most improved offense in the SEC. And the reason why I think so is because Hugh Freeze did a great job in the portal and getting weapons for whoever his quarterback is going to be. I mean, you bring in Penn State transfer Keandre Lambert-Smith, and then you bring in probably one of the highest recruited freshmen in Cam Coleman, who's from the state of Alabama as well. And those guys are going to have an immediate impact. You also bring in a Georgia State transfer and a Cal transfer as well out wide. You're going to complement these two and hopefully give them more options as well. But the issue is that in order for these guys to succeed and your quarterback to succeed, the offensive line has got to be a lot better this year. You gave up 34 sacks. You bring back 3 returners, and you bring in a guy from Mississippi State and a guy from Akron as well, too. I believe it's about 60 to 70 starts they have combined amongst these guys. And then defensively, you got 2 co-offensive or co-defensive coordinators and DJ Durkin, who comes over from A&M, and then Charles Kelly, who comes over from Colorado. And you bring back 8 starters with some experienced guys. And expect this to be a stout defense with a very physical defensive line. This was the number 6 defense in the SEC last year. Their offense was kind of their struggle point, but that defense was good if you remember. I mean, they held Alabama up until the very end at home in the War Eagle game. So, and then schedule-wise, the issue here is you don't miss any of the big guys except for Texas. You get Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Texas A&M, and you also get Kentucky, who's just a solid team year in year out too. Their lines for wins sits at 7.5. I like where that number is at. I think it's fine. I think they can get to 7, but getting over, I think you got to get really good quarterback play, and I'm just not sure if they have the guy there for it. You can see the wins in that schedule, but, I mean, you just go Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky. Then you get Vanderbilt, and you get A&M after bye week as well. But then you end the year with A&M and Bama as well, too. So if they can't get a quarterback who's going to figure it out, they're going to have to rely on that defense a lot again this year. They'll get to a bowl game. I have no doubt about that. But I think getting over 7 is a bit of a stretch.
All right. There is Auburn. Jake, I'll go to you first. As the guy responsible for about 98% of our video content. I know you've had Auburn listed as your improved teams a few times. What do you think on the Tigers this year?
Yeah, and Reese, I want to help you out, brother. So you guys don't roast you in the comments. But Robbie Ashford is transferring to South Carolina, so they will be, Peyton Thorne, I think.
Come on, Phil.
Has to be their guy. I don't think they really have a choice. They had an opportunity to go and get somebody else in the portal, but I think you're not wrong in saying that they need to figure out what they want in a quarterback, because it's more like they bring in 5-star Cam Coleman at receiver, we talk about Jeremiah Smith all the time. Cam Coleman could be that next generational wide receiver as well. He's going to be super good, and they're going to ask more of him than Ohio State will ask more of Jeremiah Smith this year. And they also bring in Keandre Lambert-Smith from Penn State. So they are giving Peyton Thorne help. I think he was the lowest in completion percentage in the SEC last year. So now it's going to be like, does Auburn still lack wide receiver talent or play calling talent, or maybe they just need to move on with a new quarterback in 2025. But I think they are stuck with Peyton Thorne in 2024.
They sure are. JP, what do you think on the
End up
Tigers?
right here.
Yeah, this is always one of the more fun rushing attacks to watch. So I'm excited to
Mhm.
see how the offensive line improves and where they can really work. Jarquez Hunter's a legit running back here in this league, and I think he fits the scheme perfectly. One thing for Auburn here that I was kind of going through and looking at, right, is Jake, you kind of touched on it. Was Hugh Freeze had the opportunity to go make moves in the portal, and I think they understood where this team was and what they'd be in 2024. There's no reason to say they're not going to improve and be a better team than they were in 23. But this is a team and a program who's kind of looking at 25 with a little more angst to it. So excited to watch and where they can improve, because if Peyton Thorne gets better, this team just gets significantly better. So excited to see what happens in 24 here.
All right, there is the Auburn Tigers. We are moving down the line. I am up, and I get to talk about a former rival, still rival in my head, but a program I respect immensely, and that is the Oklahoma Sooners, one of the new faces in the SEC. And like I said, we used to be rivals, but let me be very clear. It's a program I respect very much, and I've always been very clear that I am a Brett Venables guy. I'm a believer in his product. He comes over from Clemson 3 years ago. He's still kind of looking to put those final pieces together to take Oklahoma to the next level. Can he do it this year? You've made some changes at offensive coordinator. Bring in Seth Luttrell, who will take over the play calling sheet. He used to be the head coach at North Texas in 2015 to 2022. Now he joins the Sooners, and he's going to play a big role in whether or not they have success, because you lose out on your quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. He goes to Oregon, and you got to replace him with a young Jackson Arnold. I know a lot of people are excited for this quarterback in this system to see what he can do. He got to play a little bit last year. He played against Arizona in a very messy game for Oklahoma in a 38-24 loss. He threw for 361 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, he turned the ball over 4 times. They had 6 in the game, so maybe it was one of those weird, messy college football games, but it's obviously a little bit of a red flag. It could just be because he was young. Now, you do bring in a backup through the portal in Casey Thompson, who seems like he's been in college forever now, who played at first at Texas, then he went to Nebraska, then from Nebraska he went to FAU, and now he's at Oklahoma. So you have experience behind him. If things don't go immensely right with Jackson Arnold, you may see Casey Thompson within the mix of this offense. On the outside, you're deep in experience, man. This is probably the most impressive room on this squad. Jalil Farouk, Andrell Anthony, the former Michigan transfer, Nick Anderson. Those are really good names. And you also bring in a really good transfer from Purdue and Deion Burks, who was widely productive in the Big Ten. So it's a good room, a lot of targets for Arnold or Thompson. And that's probably the biggest side of your team that you should be looking forward to. In the backfield, this is where they need to see a little bit more consistency and a breakout year from him. But Sawchuk was good for them last year, and he closed out the season with 5 straight 100-yard games rushing. So that's a good area to see improvement as well. But it's a question mark around the quarterback position that keeps you on edge about this Oklahoma offense, to put it nicely. On the defensive side of the ball, you also bring in a new name and co-defensive coordinator Zach Alley. He came from being a GA under Brent Venables at Clemson, so they have experience coaching together. And then he was at Jacksonville State. I'm sorry, not Jackson State, but Jacksonville State. That defensive side of the ball is led by 11 returning top tacklers from this team from last year. So that's good. That's what you needed. And that's led by Danny Stutzman, who is one of the better linebackers in college football. He had 104 tackles last year. He was all Big 12. And you also get back Billy Bowman Jr., who was also all Big 12. So you have a couple of guys to center this defense around. And then you get 2 big transfers, but one on the D-line, one in the secondary, and Des Malone from San Diego State. And then at TCU, get the guy who fills the gap in Dominic Williams. It's probably one of the better transfer pickups within this conference, and he will play a huge role on this Oklahoma defense. Last year, you were 7-0, and you were looking at the college football playoff after you were in the Red River game. And then you kind of go on the road, you fall to Kansas for the first time in what feels like forever, and then you lose Bedlam, and kind of everybody wrote you off. So it's a team that's talented and has returning talent. They just need the young quarterback to step up, and their schedule's not very kind. They do play at Ole Miss, at Mizzou, and at LSU. And one of their non-con games, they host Tulane, which is no joke. So I don't know too much when it comes to the full season outlook for Oklahoma. I think a lot of it rides on the shoulders of Jackson Arnold, and they would agree. but I'm excited to see what they look like. And I know Brett Venables is going to have that defense ready to play, even with a new guy in the mix. So what do you guys think on Oklahoma? JP, you first.
Yeah, I think you get fed the schedule you get fed, and whether you improve or not, it may not matter too much just with how different things are going to be. I think they've really worked hard at getting more physical on both lines of scrimmage and just in some different spots. And
Yep.
joining the SEC here is a year, you're going to find out how far along in that process you really are. So I know we have friends that are Oklahoma fans that were not excited about the move because they liked it to be in the Big 12, and they really weren't excited about it because they knew it was going to get tougher and tougher to win 9-10 games, find yourself in a 12-team playoff. So
that road
it'll be
schedule is
interesting.
brutal. It is absolutely brutal. Going to play Death Valley that late in the year is tough. Jake, what do you think on Oklahoma?
Dominic Williams, like you mentioned, Parks, was a lifesaver. It felt like
Yes.
picking him up late spring because JP said there's just questions on both the offensive and defensive line with this football team. I look at the Jackson Arnold situation and I just wonder, like, what was to be a fly on that room in the coaching staff meetings was the Jackson Arnold situation like the Nico Maliava, Joe Milton situation, Avery Johnson, Will Howard situation, where like they want the veteran out and play the young guy? Or do you think they kind of wanted Dylan Gabriel to stick around? Like, I don't see the wins and losses really increasing or decreasing if Gabriel sticks around. But it's just interesting to see because we saw the one time we did see Arnold last year, Arizona forced 5 turnovers out of him. Obviously, completely rare circumstance, jumping right away in the bowl game, but we'll have to wait and see this year. I don't know. I don't know if Oklahoma fans are as excited about Jackson Arnold taking over this year as Kansas State fan is with Avery Johnson.
Yeah, I would agree there 100%. Reese, anything on the Sooners?
You wanted to play with the big boys. Now let's find out if you are ready to go with them. Like that physicality, I think is going to be the biggest question mark. Having your quarterback that you guys wanted is a huge bonus, but I think defensively is going to be a bigger question because you're not rolling out and playing West Virginia or Oklahoma State or whatever. I'm not saying there's bad teams this year, but you're going up against Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. You're playing against LSU in Death Valley, which is probably the toughest place to play in college football. So let's find out if they really want to be in this conference.
I saw a lot of people going at Brett Venables today, actually, about his words at SEC media days, talking about how Oklahoma's not intimidated to go into the SEC. I don't know what people expect these coaches to say at media days. Like, what is he supposed to say? Like, oh, we got screwed on the schedule. I don't know if this is our year.
I haven't slept in 3 weeks. I went to bed every other night just thinking about playing Georgia.
Yeah, of course.
I hope my guys are ready.
That. And I hope the SEC knows how good Oklahoma is as a program. Like, that's one of the more storied programs in all of college football. They're going to get there, and they beat Texas last year, who's picked second in your conference. So maybe don't hate on them as much as you do. But all right, that's the Sooners in 2024. Let's move down the line. Let's drive to Georgia. Well, maybe not drive to this team. Sorry, I had to throw it in there. But let's talk about the Bulldogs in 2024. One of the picks and favorites to win the national championship. Yeah, Jake, tell us about this team.
We're gonna leave all allegations and headline stories behind. I don't really want to get into that. Number one, I don't think I have the credentials to talk about it. And like I said, I want to talk about football and what the product we're actually going to see on the field. And with this Georgia football team, no matter what's been going on in the offseason, I still think that this is the most talented team in college football. I don't even think there's much of a debate for it. Argue all you want, Ohio State. I think I have a lot of arguments to go against you. Carson Beck might be easily the number 1 pick in the draft next year if this year goes as well as we think it will. I think he's got a ton of pro talent. I think he's got a huge ceiling. Georgia fans were ecstatic when he stuck around. I'm really excited to see what Carson Beck can do and elevate this football team this year. The wide receivers are vastly underrated, and there's a lot of seniority. It's a veteran-led group. You look at Dominic Leavitt, you look at Dylan Bell, Arian Smith. These are 3 guys who have been around for a little bit. Carson Beck's familiar with them. The continuity is already there. You look at a guy like Rara Thomas. I don't know if losing him football scheme-wise is as big as it may be perceived to be. They go out and get Colby Young from Miami. They get the Humphreys kid from Vanderbilt. It's been sounding like he's not necessarily meshing well to Kirby's offense, and he's kind of struggling to find his way in the lineup, but Still a 4-star guy who has SEC experience. Maybe it'll just take him a few games. I think he's going to be a good security blanket, even if he is your 6th receiver on the depth chart. We didn't even talk about the tight ends yet. Great group. Oscar Delp, Ben Urosek, 2 guys who I really love in this offense. Urosek comes over from Stanford. This was a guy who was in some like first team, second team, all conference votes last year at Stanford. And he's looked as the second option on that tight end depth chart. That just tells you how loaded this offense is. Trevor Etienne transfers from Florida. Montrell Johnson was told to probably be the number 1 back this year. Etienne says, all right, so be it. I'm going to go be the number 1 back for the number 1 team in the country, and it's going to be your rival. I'm really excited to see what Etienne can do. He has the explosiveness Montrell Johnson doesn't have, but he's not used to being the number 1 option. Can he stay healthy? Can he receive all of those carries for a 1,000-yard rushing season? I think they're going to need that out of him if they want to win a national championship. Let's go to the defense. It always seems like this defense, I mean, at least the last 2 years, they don't have a ton of star names that are household names, but the talent is just always overloaded when you have Kirby Smart loading this defense. You look at Michael Williams at the linebacker spot. You look at Malachi Starks at the safety position. Those are 2 names that I think will probably be first, second round draft picks next year. And the casual fan might learn as the season goes along, but they're not really big stars yet, at least to the national media. 5-star freshmen are going to be relied on this defense, surprisingly. KJ Bolden at the safety spot, Ellis Robinson Jr. at the cornerback position. These are 2 of, I think, the top 10 freshmen of last year's class, and they're going to be expected to play right away. Maybe not start, but they will get a lot of meaningful snaps. Learn those names because those will be first-team all-conference guys a couple years down the road. If there was one concern on this defense, and I think I was the one who covered Georgia last year, so I feel like a broken record when I say this. If you have to find one thing on this defense to nitpick, it's going to be the interior of the defensive line again. It's just Jalen Carter was 1 in a million. I know that was a couple of years ago, but it just feels like they haven't had those kind of guys that can be just game wreckers. Even like a Tavondre Sweat last year, a Byron Murphy. I know those guys were at Texas, but it doesn't even seem like Georgia necessarily has those kind of guys right now. Maybe they look at somebody to emerge in that spot, but as we're speaking here in July, I don't see it yet. So that's my concern for the defense. Now, all things aside, you look at the schedule, you look at this team at quick glance. Can the off the field issues prevent them from winning the national championship? Because like I said, I think this is the most loaded team in college football. Or are they just simply too good to be stopped? Is this, I think I even mentioned this in a text thread or something, is this our modern day? Is this our generation Swamp Kings? I know some national media guys don't believe so. They don't think that this team is that talented. I kind of do, man. I don't know necessarily how good of a leader Carson Beck is. I don't live inside those walls in the locker room. But if he's the number 1 draft pick next year, like as long as he's healthy and standing upright, you have those receivers in the offense and the defense. Why can't this team just win it all and beat everybody? Especially when you're in a 12-team playoff. Could you imagine? I still will go to my grave that I think that Georgia team would have won a national championship last year if they got in an 8-team playoff or whatever. Maybe I don't think they deserve to get in, but I still think that team was good enough to win a national championship last year if they got the shot. Now it's a 12-team playoff this year. They can afford to lose a couple of times.
Yeah, it's hard to see anywhere where you don't get a Georgia team into the college football playoff now with 12 teams. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, and I think in the national media, which you already mentioned, that believe Georgia would have won it if they would have gotten in last year, even out of those 4 teams, and Michigan wouldn't have. However, Michigan might get it stripped, but I really don't see a possibility of them not making this playoff with the talent that they have. JP, the Dogs.
Yeah, this is probably a team that you're going to look down the line of the 12-team playoff and be like, we let that team in. Now they're a 7 or an 8. They've won 3 straight games and they're playing for another national title. But I thought we wanted 12 teams because then we'd get more different teams
Boise
winning
State.
it, not the same 4. Yeah, that's just not realistic if we're going to be like, this team is talented in a lot of different ways. I think Carson Beck is just as advertised in talent-wise. And I like Jake's talking about, the defense is still really good. Whether or not you know all the names, they're still just as talented, maybe not the game wreckers, but guys who are legit dudes.
Mm-hmm.
Reese, any thoughts on the top dogs going into this year?
I just think getting left out last year, Shaver talks about this team could have won a title last year. And I think getting left out, especially when Kirby Smart is your head coach, I think that's going to light an enormous fire under everybody's ass. Like there is no way they're not going to give 100% every single game, every single snap. So yeah, I would be very hard to believe this team is not going to find themselves in the top 4 and then in the national title at the end of the year.
And you got to think most of the camaraderie and the talk around town's got to be, Nick Saban's out. This is our opportunity to be that dominant program within the SEC when they have some question marks at Alabama. So that's Georgia this season. Let's keep it moving. Let's go to the other new face within the conference. JP is talking to us about the Longhorns of Texas. JP, tell us about this team.
Yeah, I think you got to look at this team from a 10,000 foot view, right? Like you get a jump after a really good year where maybe you thought you needed to win that semi-final game to really get the most out of the year, play for a national title. Well, now you make a conference jump. You're just as talented in some spots, and people are excited to watch you play here. This is a Phil Steele number 36 ranked strength of schedule, headlined by a trip to Ann Arbor, Michigan early in the year. High expectations, new conference. This is a Texas team and a Texas program who most people have been waiting to be in the national spotlight for a long time. And last year was the first time they got a real shot at it. And I felt like they really lived up to the hype. I had future tickets on them. I was all in on the hype. I thought they were a better team than Washington. Sometimes games just don't work out in your fashion. Quinn Ewers, I'm an advocate for. I do think that he is that talented if he's healthy. Now, is he living up to the 5-star highest quarterback ever rated by 24/7? I mean, depends. You probably expected a Heisman at this point if you're going to live up to that, but that doesn't mean he's not a quarterback that anybody in the country would take in an absolute heartbeat, right? 3,400 yards a season ago, 22 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, and that's not the whole year. As you know, Malik Murphy got some snaps for him in certain games where he was hurt. CJ Baxter headlines a great young and talented running back room. I'm very excited to watch Jaden Bloom and Jared Gibson as well, a young kid that's coming in. I think that could flash for this team, who ran the ball very well last year, no matter who was running or toting the rock. So I'll be excited to watch that receiving core complete reset. Not a reset in a bad way. You could almost call it a reload. You could Isaiah Bond, right? I think that's a guy that's going to pop. Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, and Amari Niblack. I've talked about Amari Niblack. He's a matchup nightmare. I mean, he was at Alabama. He kind of blends in with the absolute studs. I had like a Jermaine Burton, who's more of a big play guy. Watch Amari Niblack right here go nuts. I think Isaiah Bond could be your next Xavier Worthy. He's not as fast, he's not as shifty, but he's a better route runner in a lot of ways. So excited to watch that. 4 offensive linemen return and just a first rounder loss. Like you could say that's a big deal. You're losing a guy in the first round, but you have 4 bringing back with experience, and there's a lot of guys here that could plug and play and really keep this thing moving. On the defensive line, the interior defensive line, Jake touched on during the Georgia stuff was great. Like Devondre Sweat and some other guys just really made that elite, but they didn't have the edge pass rush. You saw it in the Washington game. Penix is getting flushed, but that doesn't mean the guy's got to get rid of the football if he can move his legs a little bit and get out of the pocket. So you got to pay attention to that. They addressed that issue, bringing in Trey Moore from UTSA. Ethan Burke is back. I thought he did incredible things for them last year, and a name that doesn't get talked a lot about. So pay attention to those two here on the defensive line. The linebacking core is solid. This is truly a no-name bunch after you lose your leading tackler from a season ago. Doesn't mean they're not talented. I mean, this is a Texas linebacking core they've put a lot of time into. And the DBs are solid too. Again, they're not world-beating. They're not going to light the world on fire as the best secondary in the country, but I think they'll be just as talented. Andrew Makuba comes in from Clemson. He's ready to step up. They also bring in a kid from San Jose State I think they're excited about, in Javion Cole. Just get one of these guys to really hit, and you can change the way teams look at you in your pass defense if a guy's locking down one side of the field. There's a reason for optimism in the front seven, and I think this is one of the better front sevens in the SEC, up there with a Georgia, up there with an Alabama, and some other guys. So pumped to do that and really watch what they've got going on there. Thoughts on this? Like, how do you keep all the skill position guys involved and then keep them around next year? And then how do you make sure to get the most out of them? Like if you're spreading the ball everywhere, I think there's that many names here that we got to spread the ball everywhere and get the most out of everybody we have on our team. And then pass rush and the rush defense on the interior is going to tell us everything we know about Texas this year. And we'll find out early when they go to Michigan and play a team who literally only wants to run the football. So pumped to do that. I think Ryan Wingo, freshman, he's another guy you got to go into that fold. And then Alfred Collins is a defensive tackle I think will help void that Devondre Sweat miss.
Yeah, Texas and Michigan, that front line on Texas's defensive front versus Michigan's style of play, like you mentioned, is going to be just top tier television as you take care of the dog up there. Jake, what do you think of the Longhorns?
Yeah, to be honest, I think JP highlighted some things well, but I am concerned with this defense. I don't think it's a very good bunch, and maybe it's just unproven. We mentioned Sweat and Murphy. I think they're still concerned with the interior defensive line because they go and bring the Lole kid from Louisville and the Norton kid from Arizona. Like
Yeah.
at the end of, I think it was the end of April, like after the spring game, they're trying to bring in these guys. They are just so unsure. And so we're scared that we might not have the interior defense to stop the run that we were so good at last year. Okay. Are we going to be able to at least get after the pass this year? Because I don't think those corners are really going to step up much from last year. I shouldn't say they were bad, but compared to the top 10 teams in the country, they were not a good pass coverage defense. They need Trey Moore to step up and some other guys in the edge position. I love the offensive weapons. I'm not concerned about any of that, but you got to stop some people at some point. And that Michigan game is awesome because we're going to find out so fast what this team is made of.
Yeah, that wide receiver room is impressive. I would agree on the defensive side of things. You got to think of a couple of games, the Red River game and Washington, they kind of got exposed in some spots, especially that secondary. So I agree 100%. Reese, what do you think on the Horns?
Well, I think going into the SEC, I mean, we saw what they did last year going into Tuscaloosa and winning on the road. So I think they're ready to go right away. All the stuff Shaver's been saying, like that defense, I think is kind of going to be their biggest issue. If they're able to get stops, that offense, I think is going to be able to score me just fine. But that defense, if they have any sort of weaknesses, I mean, you're in the conference where they're going to be able to expose you week in and week out. So we'll see. We'll see if Sark and the boys can do it or not.
All right, that is Texas. Let's keep it moving. Let's go to one of the most sought after teams this year as one of the best head coaches in the history of college football steps down. They bring in Kalen DeBoer. Let's talk a little bit about the Alabama Crimson Tide and their new quest under a new head guy. Reese, tell us about him.
Yeah, Crimson fans, poor you guys. You have your lowest over-under, and I think in a decade at 9.5. Everybody knows about Kalen DeBoer coming in and your quarterback's also coming back. And then when it comes to every other position on your offense, you're still Alabama. You lose a decent amount of guys to the portal, but you're still going to reload just fine. Running back Justice Haynes is supposed to be the number one guy. Not a name everybody's probably familiar with, but if history serves us correct, you're going to learn about Alabama's running back because that offense is going to be pretty solid. And then out wide, you're losing 3 of your top 4 pass catchers in Burton, Bond, and Nyblack. So, again, you're losing your weapons, but, again, we do have Kalen DeBoer, who had probably one of the top wide receiver rooms last year in Washington. So if you're able to get a productive run game, especially with Milroe, who has your dual threat capabilities, you can probably scheme and get guys open. So you're going to become more familiar with these guys' names as well too. And then on the line of side of the ball, Yeo 49 sacks last year and really struggled to snap the ball in some high pressure moments. Everybody remembers that final snap against Michigan. But McLaughlin left. He's on with Ohio State, and Washington center followed with him too as well too. So they're going to have a little bit more of a cohesive unit. DeBoer is very confident in these guys, especially with Proctor being back as well too. They'll have a lot of confidence in that line. And then you get a new defensive coordinator in Kane Womack, who comes over from South Alabama, and they bring back 5 starters overall from that defense. So there's going to be a bunch of new names that you're not going to recognize. Like I keep mentioning before, they're like, and we talked about with Georgia, not a bunch of names that are going to jump off the page of you, but just pay attention because there's a reason why these guys are at Alabama. They're 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. They're going to be able to make an impact right away. They lose a lot to the secondary, and you're going to have to rely on guys that have a little less experience. But on the defensive side of the ball, on the line, you return 5 of 6 starters. So it's going to be the most experienced D-line DeBoer's had since he's been a head coach. And then Phil still has his team ranked, this defense ranked as the number 7 in the country. I don't expect him to fall out of the top 10, even with the names you're not going to recognize. And then when you look at the schedule, it's really not doing your new head coach any favors. Week 3, you go on the road to Camp Randall, which if you're Alabama, it's not the toughest, most daunting thing in the world, but it is Camp Randall. You have Luke Fickell. It's a whole new program, kind of think what's going on up there. It's a great test early on to see if DeBoer and this team can travel on the road and have a chance to win. But then when it comes to schedule, you catch Georgia at home, then after that bye week, and then you have a 3-game stretch with Tennessee, Missouri, and LSU all before you end the year with Oklahoma and on the road, and then you get Auburn at home. So in conference, you really don't have any breaks. I mean, yeah, you miss Texas again, but you got to be on your game. That Georgia game is going to be huge. I mean, that's going to be me versus DeBoer, who is going to be the team in this SEC this year and potentially in the future. And then my final thought too is this guy's a proven winner. So if you don't break the double digits this year, Alabama fans, don't worry. I think you're going to be just fine. It's his first year down here. He's proven that he can recruit and get guys in the portal. So just don't lose your heads because you just lost the greatest coach of all time. Give him a little bit of time, but I still don't see Alabama falling off. And with the 12-team playoff, I mean, can you reasonably think this team doesn't get in?
Yeah. I think that's a really good point in the fact that he is a winner. Like, if you win 9 games with your first year with him, shit's not hitting the fan. Like, that's fine. He's going to get the most out of what he does. He's really good at that. And I'm a DeBoer guy. I think it was a really good hire. And honestly, I wasn't shocked that they got him, but I was surprised that they went after him and not guys with more power experience. But JP, what do you think on the Crimson Tide this year?
I think if you look at what Jalen Milroe started to do later in the year, I know we were critical of him in some spots, and I think that was fair. But if we can find a way to have him grow in a DeBoer system, a Heisman ticket at what, plus 1,500 is not even a bad investment. Like, and if he's that good, like, this just helps this team that much more. So for me, a lot of it is how good is the defense without a Saban there? A guy's always been there and a defensive minded guy. I think you just need to find out. Like, Reese talked about it at Wisconsin, Georgia, immediately September. Like, we're going to know everything we need to know. And this isn't like a go to USF last year and be like, oh, I think we know Alabama. I think we'll know Alabama pretty well after those 2 weeks and what they are. Are they going to get better? Possibly. But I think we'll know the real core of what this team is going to be in 24.
Jake, we talk about Jalen Milroe all the time within our video content because people get mad when maybe we don't include him in a Heisman video. Do you think he'll end up in New York? And what else do you think on the Tide?
It's a wait and see, but man, I think it's definitely, for me, it's one of the top 3 interesting storylines going into the 2024 season. It's, can Kalen DeBoer elevate the game of Jalen Milroe? And I think we're really going to see how good of a play caller can Kalen DeBoer be, because I don't think this wide receiver room is very good. So can Milroe be that big of a playmaker? Can DeBoer open some things up for the offense? We'll have to wait and see. I can't wait to, like I said, we're already excited for football to get started, but I want to watch this team and I want to watch this offense so fast. And I also, side note, how spoiled are we as college football fans this year to just get so many great games early? I mean, we just talked about week 2, we get Michigan and Texas. By the end of September, we get Georgia, Alabama. And by the middle of October, we're going to have Ohio State and Oregon. So it's a great time to be a college football fan. And I think it's just getting good.
And I would throw in the Camp Randall game. I think Alabama, Wisconsin, like at night, I mean, JP and I can speak on it. It is not easy to play there. Like, if that crowd's into it way better than they were last year, like, it's going to be a battle. And that's
if they don't have I was just gonna say, if they don't have an offensive identity and they kind of putz around in the first quarter or two, I tend to agree with you, especially in a night game and college kids have been drinking all day and it's getting rowdy. I would say you're going to be more than a 10-point favorite. Like, go out there and score the first 2 possessions of the game.
I wonder when's the last time Alabama's played at Camp Randall. I mean, it's got to been a long time, but interesting thing to look at. That'll be a fun one to watch. But that is the Crimson Tide this year. Let's move down the line. Going back to me, we're going to talk about Texas A&M. This is a fun program to look at. It's a new era in College Station as you finally close out the book on Jimbo Fisher and you bring in Mike Elko from Duke, who he's got to be living on cloud 9 right now. You're no longer at the basketball school. You're at the school with what seems like endless pockets. And he's made some moves this offseason that things are looking up in College Station. I would put it that way, and that might be putting it lightly. You bring in an offensive coordinator on the offensive, starting on the offensive side of the ball with Colin Klein from K-State, who had the number 1 touchdown conversion rate in the red zone last year in the country. So imagine what he can do with deeper pockets and a bigger program in the SEC. I'm super excited to see what his offense looks like this year. And at quarterback, you get to return Connor Wegman off injury. He was tearing up the college football world the first 3.5 weeks before he went down with the season-ending injury. He had almost thrown for 1,000 yards through those 3.5 games. So, granted, it's not into SEC play yet, but things were looking like he was going to put up a record-breaking year, and then things go south. So if he stays healthy, you should be good at the quarterback position. You've had 7 quarterback changes in the last 2 years. So the offensive line needs to step up a little bit. You got 3 returning starters on that line, but you do bring in a Kansas transfer in Armaj Reed Adams. He might take a spot there. He is listed as one that has a returning starter. He might take his spot and maybe move some guys around, but it's a group that definitely needs to improve this year to see improvement within this team. Mike Elko's kind of a guy where I feel like you get a lot more out of your players than maybe other coaches. He's kind of got that grittiness, toughness, like coming from Duke. You don't have the NIL support. Like a lot of that goes to basketball, as I mentioned. And it just, he strikes me as that guy. Like he's just a good football coach. And I really like this hire for them. At the wide receiver spot, you have 2 returning starters, and then you have a backup that's looking to take a step forward in Moose Muhammad III. You also have a tight end room that might be deeper than most of the SEC. It's 5 deep, and that includes the Fresno State transfer and Trey Watson. It's going to be, I don't want to say it's a for sure thing. It's a little questionable on who's going to be the star of the show here. But with Wegman behind the helm, he's played in a lot of games. He's coming back from injury. He's had his rest now. Like that's where that offense is going to have to run through. So Texas A&M on the offensive side of the ball, a little questionable, but obviously it's big to get Wegman back. On the defensive side of the ball, you bring in Jay Bateman at defensive coordinator. He was the D coordinator at North Carolina in 2021. Thinking back to those days, North Carolina, sketchy defense at best is a nice way to put it, but he coached linebackers at Florida last year, and that was a pretty good group. On the defensive line, this is probably the area where I'm most excited for this team. You go into the portal and you get Nick Scorton from Purdue, who led the Big Ten in sacks. You got to expect to be able to hold the run game down and get some pressure on the quarterback alongside Shamar Turner, who forego the NFL draft, comes back to Texas A&M. So that unit, you got to feel good about it. At linebacker, you're looking to replace an All-American and Edgerrin Cooper, and you get to do that with a freshman All-American and Torin York. And then you also add Scooby Williams from Florida. So the couple of portal additions there make you feel good about your things on defense. But the question, again, I think lies on the offense here. In the secondary, this is where you struggled at most times last year. You bring in a K-State transfer and Will Lee III. He should play and make an impact. And then Bryce Anderson, he's a solid player. You return him, he'll probably be the most experienced quality piece for this secondary, but you definitely have some question marks there as well. First year, you only have 4 of 11 returning starters, but the portal additions really make me feel like this defense might take a step up. The schedule, not very favorable. You open with Notre Dame, so you're going to get the Riley Leonard versus his old former coach to open the year, which is super fun for college football. Add another one to that list, Jake, of our viewing pleasure and how spoiled we are. And then you get Bowling Green, who we talked about the Falcons, one of our early previews. Not somebody I would exactly mess with. And if there's going to be a Texas A&M spot,
that's my team out of the back, man.
Green loss, yeah, like a Bowling Green loss to A&M is something that App State just did to that program a few years ago. Then you go play on the road at Auburn. You get South Carolina on the road. So I wouldn't say it's terribly hard, but opening with Notre Dame's no joke. Jake, what do you got on the Aggies?
Yeah, first of all, Parks, you highlighted all of the transfers on defense. I feel really secure with where they're sitting at defensively too, especially of how good of a defensive coach Mike Elko is.
Mm-hmm.
We forget how bad we can go back. We were still recording as a podcast, maybe not as Play the Fight song, but in 2022, going into that season, what we thought about Duke, Mike Elko's first year, we thought they were going to be like our Northwestern last year on how bad they were going to be. They went 9-4. This can be an easy turnaround for Mike Elko in year one. I have no question about it. And I think he might have the most underrated quarterback in college football.
Yeah, Connor Wegman's a stud. JP, your thoughts on the Aggies?
My thought with Wegman is he going to turn out to be the bridge guy to a couple guys they have on campus that I think they're really high on, or is he going to be the guy? I think there's a difference there. Mike Elko is a good hire. I just want to see the running back room really pop. I think this is A&M's always better when they got a stud at running back. And you touched on the tight end room, who I think it's a tight end room that dealt with some injury. And then you bring in a transfer to kind of solve that. Anytime you can have a legit check down option and a reliable guy at tight end, I think it changes the way an offense works. And Elko will find a way to get him the football if they find themselves worthy.
Yeah. Reese, what do you think on Texas A&M?
I think you put it really well. This is a guy who just gets the most out of his players. You did it at Duke with Riley Leonard, who was a quarterback that now is at Notre Dame. I mean, this guy is going to be able to get his guys in to believe, especially the deep pockets of this school, get the recruits in. But it's going to be, I think if it's not immediate, they're going to be a little shorter leash on him. But I have a lot of faith in this program and this guy to turn the ship around and ride it especially get this team back into bowl contention. And then with this 12-team playoff, I think 3-4 years down the road, this is a team that can be in that conversation every year.
Definitely a school with that oil money that gets to be scary. Like if they get into the national spotlight, put together a 9-10 win season, and all of a sudden they have the money behind them plus the success, it might be a school that can blow up and start handling teams in the SEC like they should. Jake, were you going to say something? I saw a little giggle out of you, so I didn't know if you were going to.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Giggle monster bit him.
I got nothing.
Okay, fair enough. It is oil money. I'm not lying. But all right, let's move down to the next team. We're going back to Jake. Jake's going to talk to us about one of the toughest schedules in college football, and that's the Florida Gators. Jake, tell us about this team.
Yeah, I think especially the national media and everything surrounding this football team, all we want to do is talk about this team and the schedule. And yes, this team probably has one of the toughest schedules in college football history. I will say that. But power ratings wise, this is an underrated football team. And I think that there's a lot of talent, and it's going to have to be maximized if Billy Napier wants to be around next year or if he's on the hot seat. We'll have to wait and see. He's going to have to rely on his quarterback, Graham Mertz. I thought he showed a lot of potential last year for a guy who most of us gave up on in his Wisconsin days. He led the SEC in completion percentage last year. He was really good, really efficient. He just kind of lacked the big playmaking and kind of the downfield throw, but maybe they won't need it. We'll have to wait and see. Does DJ Lagway, the 5-star freshman, does he go into some packages as the starting quarterback? Because he's got more athleticism than Mertz can kind of offer. We'll have to wait and see. I would love to see if Napier does use Lagway in some sort of scenario. Running back room, there was a reason Trevor Etienne left. Montrell Johnson is the workhorse. He's the bell cow. He's a guy they're going to rely on. 800 yards last year. He's definitely shooting for 1,000. If this team wants to be good, they're going to have to rely on him. I don't think he's super explosive, but he's a guy who can get you 3-4 tough yards. And maybe that's what this Florida team needs to chew clock and be conservative with your Graham Mertz at quarterback. Ricky Pearsall was one of the most underrated receivers in all of college football last year. And now they have to replace him as a first-round draft pick. You look at Eugene Wilson, great freshman year last year. I think he can fill those shoes and be a really good number one option for Mertz this year. They add Elijah Badger from Arizona State late in the portal, I think like the end of April. 4-star transfer, kind of doesn't show a lot, but I think there is some big playing potential that they see with this kid. We'll have to see. I think that he's still kind of holding himself back a little bit, but he could be a difference maker if he unlocks that potential. Defense was really, really bad last year. Napier decided that he's going to go out swinging with bringing in a ton of transfers and revamping this defense, and he's going to go out or die trying. He gets Grayson Howard from South Carolina. This was a guy who started for South Carolina last year, linebacker. They get safeties DJ Douglas and Asa Turner from Washington and Tulane. Everybody knows about Cormani McLean. It sounded like he wasn't fitting the lineup so well during the summer, but I think he is coming around from what some of the national media people are saying. You get Jameer Grimsley from Alabama. You get Trequezie Bridges from Oregon, another 3-star guy. Just depth. They're trying to shore up this defense. And then you bring in DJ Slackman, who was the defensive tackle from Penn, 4-star transfer. How does he translate from Ivy League football to SEC? Might be a different game, but national media and 247 scouts think that this guy could be legit. So it's got to be a better option than what they had last year. The last piece on this defense, Desmond Watson. If you guys don't remember who this was a guy 2 years ago who started 10 games for Florida, big 21. I think he's almost damn near like 375 pounds or something. He was a guy who regressed a ton last year. He saw limited action. His tackles went broken down in half. If they want to be a good defensive line this year, he's got to step up. I don't even think he's going to be starting on this defensive line, but he was an impact guy a couple of years ago, and they need his potential back again. They really need to rely on his size and quickness to really thrive for this defensive line and be respectable when you get into the deeps of this conference. In the schedule, quite frankly, you're going to need your 2 and 3 deeps to be really good because, like we said, let's go through the last 5 games of the schedule again. Georgia, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State.
Good luck.
Yuck. Absolutely yuck. But there is a lot of talent there. I think you highlighted it in a good way because everybody just sees the schedule and is like, oh, yeah, they're not winning 5 games. Like, they have the talent to make a little bit of a question mark there. JP, what do you think on the Gators?
Honestly, Graham Mertz was a great surprise last year to watch him really
He
take
was so much better than Wisconsin.
all of the things that were said about him, and then Florida taking him, and then he's getting the job to really work that way and work out for him. I think is awesome. It's a great story for him because nobody's ever questioned the kid's character or his ability. It's just like he wasn't doing it right. Napier, if you're on any other schedule, you're probably keeping your job. But if this fan base wants it to work out this way, let's not battle anytime something goes right. Like, oh, well, you guys just won a game you weren't supposed to. Oh, well, they'll lose 5 more. Probably because the schedule is as tough as it is, right? So, like, I want the fan base to either jump on board and be a part of this program and help Napier build it, or I don't know. I feel like the hire is just completely
They're just
based
looking for
on
reasons for him to get fired.
and the next
Yeah.
hire is going to be completely based on who's available because if Florida's in a rough spot, like you're Florida, you can go get somebody and pull somebody away, but it's a tougher market than you think. And with all the moves we saw this year, less people are going to be looking to move here in 25, I think.
Right. What's your realistic number, Reese, for Napier to for sure keep his job in your mind? You're not a mad fan from the past few years. Like he gets this number of wins this year. There's no question that he should stick around.
I mean, if you
I'm
get,
going to say, I would probably say 6.
if you get 5, if you get 5, is that crazy? I mean, you don't make a bowl game, but it's still like with that schedule, it's ridiculous, man.
I
I
would
would
get to
probably
a
say
bowl
6
game,
or 7.
honestly.
You're like, he's got to stay. What do you think, JP?
unquestionable 7. If they went 7, no doubt in my mind. 6, I think you're still flirting with it, but I would keep in 5. I think is what they're hoping for to get rid of him for. Like,
Yeah. What do you think, Jake?
I think people are just crazy, man. Like I said, like JP just said, like
college,
people are just looking for
college
reasons to
football
throw this-
fans crazy.
I
Yeah.
mean, I tweeted something out the other day. I said, if Sam Pittman gets 6 wins this year and they make a bowl game, he's absolutely getting another contract. And somebody on Twitter just called me an absolute moron. I don't know what the expectation is for Arkansas, but I feel like Florida's kind of in the same boat. They still expect like 8 wins out of the schedule. Florida fans just seem very unreasonable to me. And I would like to say 6 wins keeps him around. I'd like to say 5 wins keeps him around if he's beats Miami, if he beats UCF, if he pulls an upset at the end of the year and wins in Tallahassee against Florida State. Like, just we got to analyze it for it is as a whole rather than just being so quick to assume that, I don't know, the guy's going to get fired in July.
If it goes poorly, he's not coaching that Florida State game anyway.
Yeah.
Probably.
That's a very good point. He might not be around for that, but
Tom
all
Petty's
right.
going to fire these guys up.
So
Tom Petty, your
overrated.
favorite. But all right, there is the Gators in 2024. Let's keep it moving. But before we do that, we're going to take a brief pause. While I'm yapping, just hit the like button. You're already here. Just escape,
Scroll down,
like,
dude.
and then re-enlarge. That's all you need to do. And then check out No Rivals right after the show and use that code PTFS. Adding teams, you can request your team on there if you don't see them, but there's some very fun ones. If you're rebuilding the team in College Football 25, they're probably on there. Buy a hat, look like a coach when you're playing, and use the code. Shout out to No Rivals. But all right, let's go to the next team. We are going to the Ole Miss Rebels. A lot of excitement all around Lane Kiffin's squad this year, and he went at Paul Feinbaum's throat last week, which was
Well
awesome.
deserved.
Yes, well
Got him.
deserved.
Dude,
So
shout
out to Paul Feinbaum's a wiener. Personal opinion. Now we're not media, but all right, let's go to Ole Miss. JP, tell us about this team.
This is the number 40 strength schedule, according to Phil Steele, and I don't think the schedule really matters here with all the additions they brought in. It is the number 1 transfer class from the 24 class, according to 24/7, 24 total commits, and a lot of them high-end guys. Let's start on the offense here because I think Jackson Dart is a legit top-end SEC quarterback here, and a lot of people just kind of think he's a guy that's doing a job with plenty of weapons around him and anybody could do it. I think he's a lot better than what is seen. 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions a season ago, led the SEC, I believe, in completion percentage, just under 600 rush yards and 8 touchdowns. And he also threw for over 3,300 yards. It's a guy who's legit and he's going to have weapons around him again to even have a better year. And maybe he gets a little more comfortable. Who knows? You're going to stay for another year. You might as well get better and better, right? The running back room might be by committee. I think Ulysses Bentley's probably their top guy, but I think it will be a committee thing, whether Bentley breaks out or not. You could saw it with Judkins and these guys that they aren't afraid to use multiple backs. I think Rashad Amos, they bring in a 1,000-yard rusher from the MAC. He's a number 2 that everybody loves. Henry Parrish comes in from Miami. He's actually been at Ole Miss before. Logan Diggs at LSU. He was their leading guy a season ago. So if you look at what Ole Miss has in the backfield, it's not a talent thing. I think the group itself is just as good as it was a season ago. It's just if they want a stud workhorse or if they want to use 3 or 4 guys to make this thing work. This is one of the most respected receiving corps in the country, and I'm not sure anybody would argue with you. With Trey Harris there, he's your true number 1. Antoine Wells from South Carolina, by the way, a true number 1 as well in his own right. He may play maybe the number 1 here for Ole Miss in 24. Maybe he's the number 2. I don't think it really matters because I think both of them are solid guys. And then you back that up by having Caden Prescorn from Memphis. This is like probably one of the better tight ends in the SEC. He'll be on the first and second team list, I'm sure, for a lot of guys. Underappreciated nationally, like I'm saying. They're just not a guy that gets a lot of love because the receiving core has been so good. And Quinshon Judkins was also there for the last couple of years. Offensive line-wise, 3 guys returned. Phil Steele's got him in the like top 15 or so. I don't know if it's top 15 level good in the country, but I really do hope it is, because if it is, the running game gets better, and then that just makes Jackson Dart better and the offense move better. They filled holes by adding 2 Washington transfers. Washington did win the Joe Moore Award last year for the best offensive line in the country. Now, these weren't their best offensive linemen on that Washington team, but they're definitely guys who are serviceable and can be starters at any level in the country. I'm not saying they're going to be first-round draft picks, but they're guys that can definitely fill holes and really make your team a lot better. Lane Kiffin knows how to scheme guys open. He's more creative than anybody and probably one of the better offensive minds in the country. So if you have skill guys like this and a good offensive line, it's always fun to watch what this team could do, because they did buy into 2024. So let's talk about what they did in 2024 in the portal that really made a difference here. Defensive line is where they really spent the money, knowing they needed to get more physical up front. You watch the games where they play Georgia and some other schools. That's where it all kind of fell apart. The rush defense was non-existent. They struggled on the DBs on the back end against the big play. So they do, they go get Prince Umilialian. I don't know how to say that last name. Schaefer, you know how to say it. Emmanuel.
I thought it was Umalian.
Onomatopoeia.
Emmanuel. His brother plays in Nebraska.
Nonetheless, Walter Nolan comes in and he's the best player in the portal from 24. That's a guy that's legitimately going to shore up the interior immediately. The linebacking core is solid, but not elite. These aren't names that are going to pop on a paper. The DBs are going to be good too. John Sanders returning. He was second team SEC last year. Troy Washington, and then they added 5 transfers. Some of these have got to hit. The defense is going to be worth it. You spent the money on them. At least a couple of them need to hit to really improve this team as a whole. I wrote down rush defense and the pass defense should improve. That is hopefully going to keep you from dealing with just the DBs getting ripped apart on the back end if you can get after the quarterback here. I think you need to know Jared Ivey. I said Jaden Ivey like Purdue. Jared Ivey, defensive line, 5.5 sacks a season ago. He's another guy who can get after the quarterback. And the schedule breaks down pretty well. 4 toss-ups for me. I got 1 penciled in loss. But if it's going to get better and better for Ole Miss, it needs to start on the defensive side where they spent all the money.
Yeah, it's a lot of information on the Rebels, but that's a team that made so many changes that you needed that information. Like, there's going to be new faces within these uniforms that are going to make a huge impact on the field. Jake, what do you think on Ole Miss?
Yeah, I don't know if Cowboy has some questions on the defensive line. I kind of do. I didn't know if he was trying to chime in there, but
that's JP's dog, everybody. But yes.
Yeah, there for anybody who didn't know. Just quick tidbit. I love everything that JP said. They dominated the portal so well through the winter and some of the spring stuff too. And they kind of sit around and wait, and they get a all-conference defensive end literally at the end of May, and Chris Hardy out of Jacksonville State. Lane Kiffin's just like, yeah, we got more money. Everybody just keeps giving me to push in on this year. We might as well just go and get this kid when somebody else could probably go afford him. And that's a fantastic second string defensive end for you guys in the SEC. So I would love to watch this team really succeed. Is like Penn State and Ole Miss. Those are 2 teams that this is what the 12-team playoff was made for. Now we just got to see it.
Reese, any thoughts on the Rebels quickly?
One of the greatest color schemes in football and one of the best helmets too. I think I drafted their baby blues. But I this is going to be just a very, very fun team to watch this year. You talk about all the weapons they have, the wide receiver room. You get all the names in the portal. Let's see if Lane Kiffin can put it together and this team can be in the conversation to maybe, be in Atlanta at the end of the year too. Not just make the 12-team playoff, but maybe even go win a conference title this year.
I like that. Little preview. I like that. Reese, good call. And I don't think Lane Kiffin gets enough national recognition as a recruiter. Like, obviously you get the Deions because he's getting guys to Colorado and it's all over social media, but like, he is an elite recruiter and the guys he hires do an incredible job at getting guys to the Grove. But all right, that's Ole Miss. Let's keep it going. We're going down to Reese. Reese is going to take us through I think you said it's the hardest place to play in college football, if not, definitely the SEC. Reese, talk to us about LSU.
Yeah, the real Death Valley. Shout out you, Sergeant Critcher, if you're listening to this right now. But the question on this team, on everybody's mind right now about this team, is what do they do for this defense? I mean, can it get any worse than last year? They were 12th in the SEC. The only teams worse than them was Vanderbilt and Florida last year. That's not a good company to be in, especially if you're the Louisiana State University Tigers. They got 33 points a game last year and 443 yards as well. How do they fix it? Well, we talked about them before. They bring in a new defensive coordinator from Missouri, Blake Baker. He's now the highest paid assistant coach in college football as well, too. So let's see if he can earn his money. You have 6 starters coming back, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're bringing in guys from a team which they struggled last year. I just mentioned all those stats. Harold Perkins and Major Burns are expected to be 2 major guys for this defense to be game changers. Omar Spates is out after last year. He just didn't pan out, came down from Oregon State. They bring in transfers all over this defense. The secondary is expected to be the most improved unit. The only issue is with all these transfers, they brought in transfers last year, and they were supposed to be the solution, and they weren't. So let's hope they brought in the right guys this year. Otherwise, it could just be chasing their own tail again, trying to figure this out for an offense where you lose your Heisman quarterback, but then you bring in Garrett Nussmeier, who I know Shaver's high on him, and a lot of people around the country are high on this guy too. He played very well in the ReliaQuest Bowl last year against Wisconsin. They had a comeback win, threw for almost 400 yards, and had 3 touchdowns in that game as well too. So we've seen the product. Now it's going to be, can he sustain it for an entire year as well too? And then you also lose Daniels' dual threat capability as well too. So expect the running back room to become a little bit more productive this year with Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson. And then out wide, you lose Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas as well too. And those are massive names for an offense, why they were so successful last year. So it's going to be a little bit of tough sledding, I think, adjusting with all of your weapons, especially using your quarterback and your top 2 wideouts. But it is at Louisiana or LSU. You're going to be able to replace guys and bring them in too. And having Brian Kelly, who I believe is a top 10 coach, maybe top 5 to some people in college football. So he'll be able to figure out some things to do for this team to be successful early on. And the schedule, I think, is also very workable for this team with your over-under sitting at 9.5 wins right now. You avoid Georgia and Texas. Then aside from going on the road to A&M, you get everybody else big at home. You get Ole Miss, Bama, and Oklahoma all at home. And like we talked about before, Death Valley is a very hard place to play, especially at night. And I think you also open up the year with USC for a neutral site game in Las Vegas, which is going to be a lot of fun to see because you'll see right away if that defense kind of did figure it out because you're going up against Lincoln Riley, who's notoriously one of the best offensive minds in college football. And just a little side note, early on, this might be one of the most fun games to bet the over on, whatever it's at, because if defenses can't figure it out, we'll see if USC figured it out or if LSU figured it out, because both offenses, I think, are going to be able to score a lot of points.
I like that. That was going to be my first thing I brought up was that LSU USC game to open the year in Vegas. I think you're going to find out a lot about both of those teams. Like, that's one of the benefits of seeing these teams match up early. You kind of see it with Florida State and LSU. I believe that was the matchup a couple of years ago with the missed extra point. Like, those early games, you can't really take too much away, but you kind of learn a little bit more when they have as many question marks as these teams do. JP, your thoughts on LSU?
Do we know that win total? LSU's
9.5.
9.5.
Yeah,
Okay,
9.5.
we'll come back to that later.
All right, I like that. Jake, any thoughts on the Tigers?
62.5 is what that over under is for the LSU
Yeah.
USC
Thank you.
game.
By
the way,
still sounds fun though.
Just the defense, I don't think they fixed any of the problems through the portal or just the secondary is honestly probably one of the worst in the SEC. But Kyron Lacy, that's a name you want to know for the wide receiver. I think he's going to have a big year like Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas did last year.
All right, there is the LSU Tigers. Let's finish it off with our full team previews with Kentucky, and then we will go to our short segment to end it. But taking a look at the Wildcats this year, Mark Stoops is back in town, but he brought some new faces in with him. Not by choice. Cohen goes to the NFL at the offensive coordinator spot. They bring in Bush Hamden from Boise State, obviously a guy we know because we follow Boise State pretty thoroughly. They have some question marks on. I think some might be a bold way to put it. They have all question marks on the offensive side of the ball. I believe we had somebody come and ask us early in the year, what do you think about Kentucky? Dude, it's hard to tell until we see this team on the field. I don't know if you can answer that question thoroughly. They bring in Brock Vandegrift, the former five-star quarterback, transferred out of Georgia. He never saw the field. So we finally get to see him on the SEC field and see what he can do. Five-star quarterback at Kentucky, but obviously who's with him? Who's standing in the backfield with him? Ray Davis goes out. He was super good last year. They bring in Chip Tranum from Ohio State, 373 yards on the ground last year. He's pretty good. I mean, he's a viable option, but not a ton of experience there either. So the 1-2 punch, question mark. I know if you watch these previews, you know I love using that term, but that's really the only way to put it, especially with this offensive side of the ball for Kentucky. At wide receiver, you have one of the more consistent tandems. This is probably the most settling part of your offense. Brown and Key come back. That's your consistency. And then you add a piece, and he came from Missouri. And I'm going to say the name, and I'll see if you can make the connection. And Jamori Macklin. Jamori Macklin is the cousin of Jeremy Macklin. So he gets him out of Missouri, the original Macklin played for. But the two close names are terrible, by the way. But so those are your three targets if you're Vandegrift. Two good ones, and then a question mark again. And then the offensive line. I think the scheme is going to be super important to seeing improvement here. They were good last year, which is why Ray Davis was good, but you got to see some replacement spots as well. The new scheme it's everything's up in the air with this offense. On the defensive side of the ball, it's a complete different story. You return 8 of 11 starters, including Deion Walker, who is a projected first rounder. And then your rush defense was outstanding last year. Led the SEC. You only gave up 113 yards per game on the ground. And then you bring in a few transfers, another one from Georgia in Jamon Dumas Johnson. He had 3.5 sacks last year for the Dogs. He comes in and he'll be really good at linebacker for this squad. So it looks like they have both the defensive line return piece and a transfer at the linebacking core to, again, have a good rush defense. The schedule is very spread out when it comes to tough games. Like, you don't get those stretches of 2 or 3 games in a row where you should win these. Like, you throw in an at Georgia, or you host Georgia week 3, and then 3 weeks later you're at Ole Miss, and then 2 weeks later you're at Tennessee. Like, I don't see the spots here for Mark Stoops squads with all these question mark on the offensive side of the ball to really take advantage of what this year holds for them. So I don't know about Kentucky. That's the best way to put it. And I feel like we said the same answer 3 weeks ago, but nothing's really revealed itself to tell otherwise. So Vandegrift is holding a lot of cards in his hand. We'll see if it can pan out for him. Jake, what do you think on this Wildcat squad?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it a little bit, because I was going to rebuttal just a little bit. I think that the receivers, I really like them. I think that this is an underrated receiver room
that's
in
the
the
best
SEC.
part of it.
4 returning starters on the offensive line is something you can rely on. I think obviously it's kind of like last year. Devin Leary wasn't as good as what we expected. I think injury kind of set him back a little bit, and that was because of why. But yeah, your receivers are only going to be maximized with how good can Brock Vandegrift be. So it's going to be still a wait and see because of the uncertainty of the former 5-star quarterback.
JP, any thoughts on the Cats?
Yeah, some people say that this is the best job in college football that Stoops holds, just because you can win 7 and 8 games every single year and never have to worry about it. But then you make SEC money. I think this year is literally this is why. This is the poster child for that. Vandegrift, again, we don't know anything. I think Tranum's a good get. I think he's going to fit very nicely in there. Don't expect him to run for 1,500, but maybe he can go get you 900 to 1,000, and you could really be solid. If there's something we know about Kentucky, they're going to play solid defense. They'll be solid on the offensive line. Although I think we've kind of left out that they aren't the same big blue wall they've been in years past on the offensive line. They've just been good. They haven't been plus. So excited to see what they do, but it is a team that just kind of sits in the shadows of the SEC for the most part. And I think they'll be the same way this year.
Reese, you think Chip Tranum can replace the shoes of a guy that we talked about a ton last year in Ray Davis?
It's going to be tough, but I mean, when you do have the line that you have, you bring back the 4 guys, it definitely helps out, and you have your quarterback too. So what better way to help a quarterback than have a good run game too? And I mean, it's Kentucky. They're just a stingy, stubborn team year in and year out that's going to be good. I mean, if they can play spoiler and beat some of those teams at the top, and kind of maybe earn an extra win or two like this year, it's just a well-coached program as well too. It's Kentucky. They're in the SEC. They're in those shadows, but they're still just a good program year in, year out.
Finally getting to see Vandegrift on an SEC ball field. We'll see if the 5-star can do it. But that ends team previews in full length. Now let's go to our fun, fast segment. We're going to cover the final 4 teams within 4 minutes. Everybody has one team assigned. We'll lead it off with Jake. Then we'll go to JP, Reese, and finish off with myself. We're going to shoot for 1 minute each team.
I'm nailing it this week.
within
We will
1
get.
minute.
We will
Not
we will
going
get
over.
1 minute. We will
Yeah,
get.
we
one
are-
minute.
We
We're
are going
timing
to do it.
ourselves here?
He goes. All right.
Yep,
all
I
right.
got it.
Not going over.
I
got
know for
it
a fact
set
I
up.
went over last week.
Nailing it.
We were 1 minute and 50 seconds over last week. We're going to lead it off with Jake.
We already forgot
Jake,
about last week.
whenever you're ready, take us away.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me get
Hold
started
on.
here.
Let me.
Let
Oh
me-
my god.
Let me
Put
put
the
on
hat
my
on.
hog.
Great
Let me put on my
podcasting.
hog
Okay.
hat.
Yeah.
Let me put on my hog hat here quick before I get started. Let's talk about Arkansas a little bit. This is the Play the Fight Song de facto team, so I'm honored to be the one to present it. Is this the final year for Sam Pittman? If it is, it's going to be going out in bizarre fashion because he brings in a former Arkansas head coach and Bobby Petrino to be the new offensive coordinator. So at least he's going outside of the box with this guy. Everyone was really impressed with Boise State transfer Taylon Green in the spring. I think that's a guy they're gonna roll with at QB number 1 this year. So look out for that. Jaquindon Jackson comes in. He started at running back for Utah last year. They have a guy that they can rely on in the run game. Hopefully, I think the receivers have some good experience. Pittman needs to rely on his positional expertise to improve that offensive line if he wants to keep his job this year. The defense is where I am a little skeptical. Ton of question marks, but they have 2 guys in safety, Jaden Johnson, and defensive end Landon Jackson, that could be all conference guys. I said if they get to 6 wins, Sam Pittman will keep his job. I'm pulling for him. I don't know if they can get it done.
No.
The old mute game.
God.
It's all right.
No.
We're not.
Oh,
we're
no.
gonna get a little lap, but go ahead.
Jeff Levy comes into Stark Vegas to like put this one. To say it nicely, this is a program that really needed to change it. It's getting kind of through the ringer the last couple of years, unfortunate circumstances. But I think when you look at what the Bulldogs are right now, it's a team that's just looking for an identity, and I think Levy can be the guy to bring it to them. Blake Shapen can come in and really help this team out and benefit from a Jeff Levy system. I'm not saying he's going to be a top end SEC quarterback or anything like that, but I do think he could benefit from it. The receiving core completely transfer built. Kevin Coleman, and then UTEP transfer Kelly Akari. I think he is a solid guy. He went for over 1,000 a season ago at UTEP with the Miners. The offensive and defensive line are huge question marks. I'm actually not going to call them question mark. I don't think they're up to SEC talent level in those spots. So it's really going to make it tough for them to win a lot of football games. Long term, this is the right hire. It's going to give you an identity. It's going to give you a fan base, a fun thing to watch. So Bulldogs, it ain't 24 and it may not be 25, but maybe 26 is the year.
Vanderbilt, head coach Clark Leak enters his 4th season at the helm, and now he's going to take over defensive responsibilities. And then you have a new offensive coordinator in Tim Beck as well. And then also you're getting a new quarterback from New Mexico State and Diego Pavia, who threw for 2,900 yards this year and 26 touchdowns. Going to be a little different from the Conference USA to the SEC, but they have a lot of confidence in this guy. You lose your top 2 pass catchers to Colorado and to Georgia, and then defensively you bring back 7 of 8 on their line, and Lee's going to rely on these guys a lot, I think, to kind of set the tone. And then schedule-wise, their over-under win sits at 2.5. You can see 3 wins, but you have to win these 3 games because I don't know where you get any other wins. You have Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. That's the games they got to win. The rest of the schedule, I don't know. You get Virginia Tech, you get Missouri, Bama, Kentucky, Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, and Tennessee. It's going to be tough to see where they have wins, but that's Vanderbilt this year.
Yeah, looking at South Carolina, Beamer squad, trying to bounce back a little bit, but it's tough when you have a question mark alone at the quarterback position. You lose Spencer Rattler, who threw for over 3,000 yards last year in a record-breaking year. He goes to the NFL, and you have a quarterback battle going on between Robbie Ashford and freshman Lenoris Sellers, redshirt freshman Lenoris Sellers, who saw 3 games last year. From what I've seen from their media, Lenoris Sellers is the starter going into week 1 against Old Dominion. It also hurts a lot less when you bring in Rocket Sanders from Arkansas. He's one of the better running backs within this conference. He's coming back off of a labrum tear injury, so you may not see him at the beginning of the year, but he's going to play a huge role in this offense. Your backup running back's Oscar Attaway, the North Texas transfer. He should be a viable option as well. You have a small wide receiver room. You don't have a single wide receiver over 6'2", except for 1. And in the SEC, that's unheard of. So they're going to have to be a little bit pestful at the wide receiver position. Your old line is finally healthy again. Thank God for the offseason because they were injury-ridden as could be. And then on defense, you switch to a 3-3-5 base from your 4-2-5. You're looking to make defensive scheme changes because your defense was terrible last year. The bright spot you return is Debo Williams, and the schedule really doesn't line up for Beamer's squad. I think 7 or 8 wins here would be elitely impressive, almost as like Billy Napier is. The schedule is very hard. So that's South Carolina in 2024, and that is 4 teams in 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Even with the mute pause, that's pretty good. I mean, we're pretty close. Jake, did you think
I didn't want to make any noise.
Let's go, boys.
Yeah, I got a set. Well, it
Scores
depends
up.
when you started me. I started at like actually talking at like 15 seconds, but yeah, I was at 4 minutes and 30 seconds or something. So yeah, we made pretty good time.
Technicality.
Yeah, we really did, especially with the mute. You might as I'll take 10 seconds off for the mute. So 4:12
Might be exaggerated.
But all right, that's 4 teams in 4 minutes, and that is the entire SEC conference in 2024. Let's go to the grand scheme to wrap everything up. We got a few minutes remaining. Let's talk players to watch first. Jake, who is your player to watch within this conference this year?
Yeah, I could not decide on one.
I know there's a lot of sneaky ones.
There were I kind of want to highlight Lenore Sellers, and maybe not because I don't know if South Carolina is going to be able to get to 6 wins, but I think that if you pay attention to all SEC, because everything just means more or whatever the hell they say, you want to pay attention from top to bottom. And if Shane Beamer wants to stick around, I think it's going to rely on the relationship he has with his quarterback. From everything I've seen on Twitter from South Carolina, they think that they have their guy. Like they're really high on this kid. Maybe they want to give him some more talent at receiver, or just maybe some more height.
You honestly bring in Robbie Ashford from a quarterback battle alone that Reese originally talked about, not knowing he had transferred, and he's losing that battle to Lenore Sellers. So he's got to be immensely talented. JP, what do you think for your player to watch?
Yeah, I wrote down Rocket Sanders here. It's odd we're doing South Carolina twice.
Oh yeah,
but I didn't want to take a 1B and then take somebody's. I don't think anybody will have mine anyway. But I think it's a crazy talented running back there that really can help out a Beamer offense that needs a guy like that. So I had Rocket Sanders here. I just won't give my other one just in case.
That could be an impressive 1-2 punch. It could be a little.
I do want to give one more. I feel like let the
other 2 people give their
first. I just said
one.
when everybody's done. Damn, you can't even let me finish.
But all right, Reese, give us your player to watch.
I went with Taylor Green, coming over, Arkansas quarterback. You're replacing KJ Jefferson, coming over from Boise State. Dude threw for 2,000 yards in 22, and then he threw for 1,700 yards last year. Granted, it's different coming from the Mountain West to the SEC, but you're getting Bobby Petrino, who, he's an offensive guru, coming over from A&M too. So let's see if he can maybe unleash a little bit of stuff for Taylor Green and see if Razorbacks can have a successful season.
All right. Mine, I kind of went chalky with it, but not too far. It's a guy JP mentioned in his preview, but dude, Trey Harris is an absolute beast. Like that's going to be a guy, especially within Lane Kiffin's scheme, with an experienced quarterback at the helm and Jackson Dart at wide receiver for Ole Miss. It's going to put up absolute numbers. Last year, 54 receptions, nearly 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. He averaged 18.2 yards per catch. So he's a downfield threat with an offense that likes to throw the ball downfield. He had 5 games of 100+ yards receiving. So he went off a few times, and I expect him to do it even more this year and be an All-American. So you're going to hear a lot about Trey Harris, but I just got to highlight him in a conference where I feel like we talk about Texas's wide receiver room, or maybe one big name here from Georgia, but like this Ole Miss wide receiving core is going to make a lot of noise. So that is my player to watch. Let's go to the grand scheme of the conference championship game, pick and prediction. Who's playing in it and who's winning it? Jake.
Highlight your guy fast. Shut up.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Nick Gordon. Nick Gordon's gonna
Nick Gordon.
Nick Gordon's gonna be the best edge rusher in the league. Okay.
That's insane.
Maybe James Pierce. Fine.
Whatever.
Let me all right. Sorry. Rewinding back. My conference championship. Georgia. I'm putting Georgia in there. It's
Are we
hard
saying
to tell.
champ yet?
With the no division thing, you could really slide in like 3 or 4 teams for me to play Georgia. For now, I'm just gonna go Ole Miss. I'm gonna go Ole Miss because I think they're better defensively than where Texas is at right now, and offensively they match Texas. I think Ole Miss might have a tougher schedule, but I'm gonna go with the more talent right now. And I think this is finally Lane Kiffin's year. Doesn't matter though. I've said it once and I'll say it again. This is the most talented team in college football. Your Georgia Bulldogs will win the SEC.
Yeah, put me on the exact same thing. I thought I was going outside the book. Like I didn't think anybody would have actually Ole Miss going and competing for it, but I had the exact same thing. And I also have Georgia winning it. I think there's too much returning talent, and the additions they made in the backfield are going to be too much to handle for that conference. And there's a little bit of a leeway with Alabama in their first year under their new head coach. JP, who do you got and who do you got winning it?
Yeah, it's fair. I have Georgia in it, and I was kind of with Jake. I had a couple teams in here and moved them around. I actually landed on Missouri. I just went
I was
schedule
going to
wise.
say,
and I was looking at this.
somebody please take a shot on Missouri.
I just think schedule wise, it plays too well into their favor. Ole Miss, I would really like to take because I think they are good enough to win the conference, and they're definitely going to be in the playoff in my mind. But I couldn't go Alabama. I think there's too many question marks. Texas wise, I think you're going to lose the head to head with Georgia. So then you get in a weird tiebreaker thing with other teams, depending on what happens through the rest of the year. So I ended up with Missouri. Georgia will be your 2024 SEC champs. Probably the number one overall seed going into the 12-team playoff.
Reese, who you got?
Well, I'm just going to completely change mine. Then I'll dice it up. I'm going to give me Georgia. Can't go away from them. But give me Tennessee in there with them.
All right.
Okay.
That would be an absolutely impressive
How about
year.
Nico?
Sophomore quarterback. We can call him sophomore, I guess. Probably a redshirt freshman. Am I correct on that? Redshirt freshman? Is that what he's listed at?
Yeah.
I think he's a true soph, I think.
Yeah, I don't
True
think they're
soph?
redshirted.
Okay, so the bowl game
You say
doesn't count
sophomore.
at all.
That means sophomore.
Well, you get 4 games.
Yeah, I know. So I didn't know if he got a redshirt year too then. But all right, that is the conference championship game. Let's go to finalize the episode and with our hot takes, bold takes, shocking teams or disappointing teams. JP, who do you got in what category?
Yeah, I'm going to do disappointing here because I don't have a surprise team that I'm too confident on. I really wanted to hear what you guys just went through everything. Disappointing LSU. Offense is going to be good. There's just not an answer for the defensive backfield. I don't think there's an answer for an underperformed defensive line who I think is going to get eaten up quite a bit. Now, are they talented enough? Sure. But they're not up to the level they need to be to win a lot of games in the SEC. So that's where I went with it. I think they'll just be a little more disappointing, and people will get upset with Brian Kelly for not making the moves in the offseason. But maybe he was just gearing up for the next year where they'll spend their money.
I'll go to me next. I don't think I have any hot takes per se in this conference, but I will say my surprising team here is I think Mike Elko's squad could make a little bit of noise, win 8-9 games. Like that's just the coach he is. He does more than what we think with what he has. So I think he could roll out 8-9 wins at Texas A&M, and all of a sudden they're back in the mix of things and the fan base is all over you again. But I'm just a believer in Mike Elko and what he does. So that would be my surprising team for this year. What do you think, Jake, on surprising, disappointing, or hot takes?
Surprise team, Kentucky. Hot take. Let's do it because we don't work for ESPN anyway. So what do we got to lose? Oklahoma will finish higher than Texas in their first year of the SEC.
There you go.
Dude, that's a
Ice it up.
take. It's definitely
Ice
hot.
it up.
It's definitely hot, but I can see it. I think the Oklahoma slander is crazy. I think the Oklahoma slander going into this year is crazy. But I like that. Reese, what do you got? You got any hot takes for us or shocking or disappointing teams?
I don't know if it's as hot. It's the same thing I think last year. I mean, Ohio State, I think, is the most bet on team. But I don't think the SEC, I think it may be a little hotter than because you are adding Texas in this year. But I still don't think the SEC gets a national champion this year. I think you're going to get somebody from the Big Ten or maybe even Florida State will be something crazy here. That's what I'll say.
He's doubling down.
Champion.
Oh, I mean, he hit it last year.
Yeah, he did.
Did hit it last year.
But all right, that is it. That is the entire SEC conference from start to finish. If you have any outstanding concerns or questions, something you want us to expand on, please drop in the comments. Please drop a comment. Let us know that you're here. Let us know what you think, what we can improve on. We appreciate you being here. So drop a like. Shop No Rivals. What should they do to the video, Reese?
Like, comment, subscribe.
Do all 3 of those things. You might as well. The guy asked you to. JP, what code should they use if they go shop at No Rivals?
PTFS.
I love it. That's everything for this week. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next week. Jake, take us away.
Does Reese have something before I send us
I'm gonna
off?
say, hey, if you're listening to this, it's Saturday and on Saturday night or whatever, go have yourself a drink. We're going to be hanging out all together. Our buddy's getting married. It's going to be one of the best nights of our lives. We love you, Parksy. Can't wait to see you.
The boys are getting back together, so we better play it.